Thank you. Welcome everybody for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to the 5th webinar in the Linked Early Modern Drama online training series. This webinar is funded by a connection grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. This is our July editorial webinar. We have 2 presentations today. The first by me about semi-diplomatic transcriptions in general and printed texts in particular. And then Laura Estill, author of the forthcoming chapter in our documentation on how to encode manuscripts. And Laura will speak about the particular challenges of encoding manuscripts. The whole summer is focused on semi-diplomatic transcription. So in addition to today's webinar, we have a July 25th webinar, which Navarra Holden will be delivering on basic styling mechanisms for our semi-diplomatic texts. And then in August, I and Nahila Galliford, Assistant Project Manager, will talk about how to encode speech prefixes, literary divisions, and stage directions in semi-diplomatic transcriptions. And then on August 22nd, Navarra will again speak, this time on advanced styling. So if you've ever wanted to learn anything about CSS or CSS Flex, this is a great opportunity to do a deep dive into a really interesting technology. To introduce myself, my name is Janelle Jenstad. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a professor of English at the University of Victoria, and I'm also the conceptor and director of LEMDO. I do have editorial credentials. I am the editor of The Merchant of Venice for the new Internet Shakespeare editions. And if you know not me, you know nobody, part 2 for Digital Renaissance edition. The advertisement for this webinar said that Brett Greatly Hirsch would be here today, but it turns out that he can't be here today. So I'm going to do his bit, and you will see him at some point during the year. We like to begin in a good way at the University of Victoria by acknowledging the land on which we live and work. We acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt peoples on whose territory the university stands, and the Lekwungen and Wet'suwet'en peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Okay, so let's dive into our learning objectives. By the time we're done my part, before I hand over to Laura, you'll know what a semi-diplomatic transcription is and what it is not, why we prepare semi-diplomatic transcriptions and for whom we prepare them, how your semi-diplomatic transcription fits into the edition that you're making, what to take as your starting point, how to select digital surrogates, and finally, the basic principles of semi-diplomatic transcriptions. So feel free to ask questions as we go or at the end of the webinar. If you put questions in the chat, we'll read them out loud because people who've been viewing them afterward have said that they'd like to know what questions were being asked in the chat. Navarra, if I forget, please remind me. So let's dive in with our first learning outcome. What is a semi-diplomatic transcription? And more importantly, what it is not. And my caption there is adapted from the Hippocratic Oath, either help or do not harm the text. So definition of, well, first I'll note that we've had a bit of a terminology change. So if you came to LEMDO from the Internet Shakespeare editions, you will be more used to the term old spelling text, sometimes abbreviated OS. The QME project has elected to continue using that terminology, but the new Internet Shakespeare editions and Digital Renaissance editions have moved to the term semi-diplomatic transcriptions. You'll sometimes hear us talk about it as semi-dip. So quick definition, a transcription is a typescript of the manuscript. Diplomatic transcription would be a transcription in which there are no changes introduced or as few changes as possible. We don't aim to do diplomatic transcriptions. We aim to do semi-diplomatic transcriptions with some changes introduced. What a semi-diplomatic transcription does not do, it does not offer an exact copy. It does not look exactly like the playbook. It does not capture broken type, variant letter forms, folds in the page, slip type, or over or under inking. This definition at the bottom of the screen is from the Digital Renaissance Edition's editorial guidelines, which we have now encoded and will be releasing in August. Semi-diplomatic transcriptions represent only selected features of the source document. So here's an example from A Humorous Day's Mirth, which will be released with the first release of the Digital Renaissance editions. You can see that after the word colonette in our witness, there appears to be a bit of a space. We silently close that up. We don't type out the long S. We normalize it to a short S. But on the other hand, we retain the punctuation exactly as it's presented in the text. And we also retain particular spellings, orthographies, and typographies. So we don't normalize the U to a V and have rain. The way our search works on LEMDO, if someone were to search for the word have, our stemmer would also look for any instance of the same word with a U in it. Our semi-diplomatic transcriptions do add navigational and citational aids so that people can cite the text easily. We add continuous speech numbers so people can cite by speech number. And we also add witness line numbers, which currently we're not displaying in our text, but are there in the underlying XML. We also add interpolated signature numbers so that people can navigate through the text by the signature number of the page. We add page and column beginnings, and we also include all of the formworks elements. So here are a couple of screenshots from the same bit of the text. You can see that we add SP2, SP3, and those will run continuously through the whole text. They're also clickable, and clicking on them generates or shows you the unique URL, and you could link to that from a course pack, from an article. You can, in other words, you can cite these very precisely. You can also see that we've captured the formworks here. So at the bottom of this page, it says A2. We've got the catchword, but then we've added a vertical line to indicate that a new page is beginning. And we add the bibliographic signature number A2B to make it a bit easier to navigate through the text. And
Janelle, there's a question in the chat.
Okay, thank you. Navarra, do you mind reading it out?
Oh, I can read it if I'm
Okay.
unmuted already. Pia asks, what is the reason for not having lines cited on the website, please?
We haven't, we just haven't built the interface for that yet. Yeah, when I ask Martin to do it, it will probably happen, but we haven't done it yet. And we do have to think about where to put it because there's limited real estate even on a computer screen. And so we'd have to think carefully about where exactly we would put that on our screen. Okay, and you can see that the table of contents allows people to navigate through the semi-diplomatic transcription by the signature numbers. For the semi-diplomatic transcriptions, the main units are actually pages. Okay, so why we prepare them and for whom? The main goal of DRE's semi-diplomatic transcriptions is to facilitate searching and indicating the digital facsimile from which they derive. So LEMDO tends to defer to what the Digital Renaissance Edition project has decided. DRE is the flagship project of LEMDO and is likely to be the biggest project over time. So you can't search a digital facsimile, not yet. That technology may come in the future. If something is transcribed, we can search for all instances of, this is IEW or IEWE or Shy for Shylock. So I was interested in this question of what Shylock is called and how many times that, word shows up in the text because it has some ideological weight attached to it. It turns out that Jew shows up 113 times and Shylock shows up 27 times. You can also harvest all speech prefixes, which is very useful for an editor who's trying to figure out what to call characters in the modern text. And we can also index original stage directions, and down the road maybe generate a digital encyclopedia of all original stage directions, a kind of virtual companion to the Desson and Thompson Dictionary of Stage Directions. So we standardize some features because they help us search and index. In the classroom, teachers will be able to show students how editions are made, which is, I certainly myself find that students really enjoy looking at the text. It helps to demystify editions, and it gives them a sense that the edition is not the ultimate authority. It is a way of presenting the text, and maybe they themselves would have done different things if they'd had the opportunity to edit. Ideally, we pair that with a little bit of an editing exercise. So teachers will be able to compare witnesses. So if you want to show your students what, Q1 Hamlet looks like, the to be or not to be speech, and the folio to be or not to be speech, or the Q2 text, that can be a real eye-opening experience for students. Scholars search the semi-diplomatic transcriptions, or all of them at once. Just a moment. I'm just going to tell my family to go away. Scholars will get more accurate answers from our transcriptions than they will from EBO TCP or from mechanized modernized corpora. So you can get complete corpora that have been taken from EBO TCP and then run through something like BARD and lightly modernized. And they can be used for some computational analyses. So people have taken our texts and used them to run stylometric analysis in order to figure out who is the most likely author of the text. And there are editorial outcomes as well. You, the editor, will become intimately acquainted with your text. I find it's one of the best ways to prepare yourself to put a modern text together. You'll be better able to decide what to take as your base text, especially if you end up preparing more than one witness, which is not something we recommend, but it's something you can do. Because we have a digital semi-diplomatic transcription, when you're talking in your textual essay about features of the text, you can make direct links from the textual essay to the semi-diplomatic transcription. And you will have an excellent starting point for your collation and modernization. We actually take that base text, remove some of the bibliographic encoding, and put the modern encoding in place. So you'll actually take your semi-diplomatic transcription as the starting point for your modern text. So how the semi-diplomatic transcription fits into your edition. It's the first step of your edition. So DRE says that you are expected to complete a transcription of at least one witness, the one you will use as the base text for your edition, before preparing the modern spelling text. And I just wanted to define the term witness for anybody here who doesn't necessarily know what it is. A witness is an extant document or part of a document. It could be a manuscript or a particular copy of an early printed text. So just to give you some examples, Q1 Hamlet is a publication. The Folger copy of Q1 would be a witness to that publication. I don't actually know if the Folger has Q1 Hamlet. I don't think it does. First step of your edition. I just wanted to define base text as well while we're here. Base text is a transcript of a specific documentary witness, i.e. a material artifact, whether in manuscript or print, that once encoded in TEI will serve as an editor's starting point for their edition. So it's not copy text. Copy text would be, I'm going to base my text on my modern text on Q1. Base text is, I've got a specific copy of Q1 that I've transcribed, and I'm going to take that as my starting point, as my base text. Can you do more than one? If you go to the old Internet Shakespeare Editions website, you will see that some of the editions are very full. So there is a Q and an F King Lear. There's also a modern version of Q and F King Lear. There are transcriptions of Q1, Q2, and F Hamlet, and modern editions thereof. We have a Q1 and a Q3 of Musidorus forthcoming in DRE, because Q3 adds scenes that are not in Q1. But before you go down that road, consider how much time you have and the timing of when you do this. So we don't want you to get bogged down in doing multiple semi-diplomatic transcriptions. So what we recommend is that you read the textual criticism, decide what you want to take as a copy text, pick a base text, a single witness of that copy text, and transcribe it. You can do other witnesses at the end if you have time. So how to get started, and here I'm talking about print rather than manuscript. Depending on the anthology that you're editing for, you might actually have a different starting point. So for NISE editors, all the quartos, octavo, and folio texts have already been transcribed for the ISE or by the ISE, and they've been remediated by the LEMDO team for the new Internet Shakespeare edition. So your work as editor is actually to check the LEMDO team's work and then sign off on the transcription. Once you've done that, we consider it to be peer reviewed. You're the peer reviewer, in fact. If you are editing for Moemel mayoral shows, the quartos of all the pageant books have been transcribed on the Moemel site. You just need to check the Moemel team's work and again, sign off on the transcription. You're the peer reviewer. If you're editing for DRE and the text has been transcribed in EBO TCP, we can take that as a starting point because the EBO TCP texts were encoded in TEI and they're all available in an open access way on GitHub. So if you give us the STC number of the publication that you want to take as your copy text, we will go to EBO TCP's GitHub repository and we will find it. We'll find the transcription. And we can run a conversion using XSLT to turn it to rough LEMDO TEI. Then you will correct that transcription and you'll supply the missing information, of which there's often quite a bit. The EBO TCP transcribers are fairly conservative and they don't make guesses that we might feel more confident as editors making. So there's the workflow there. One thing to keep in mind, of course, is that EBO TCP is a transcription of the copy that was selected for the EEB microfilm series, and then the microfilms were then digitized for EBO, and EBO TCP transcribed that digital surrogate of a black and white microfilm of a single copy of a book. You may be taking a different copy of the publication as your witness. You may want, the British Library copy rather than the Huntington Library copy to be your base text. So you will have to compare that EBO TCP transcription very carefully against the witness that you've chosen and make any changes. So how do you select digital surrogates or facsimiles? For the students here, you'll see the term facsimiles and surrogates used more or less interchangeably in the field. So the question there is, what are you correcting against? You have to pick a digital surrogate to collect against. So we're doing at LEMDO single witness transcriptions. We're not trying to create an ideal copy of Q1. We're just picking a copy of Q1 and then transcribing it faithfully. And that's what TEI calls for. We host the digital surrogates or facsimiles at LEMDO, and then we embed them in our semi-diplomatic transcriptions. So people can see them side by side like this. Okay, same passage again in a humorous day's mirth. Can't remember. Oh, this is the UCLA copy. So this semi-diplomatic transcription on the left is a transcription of the UCLA copy. All right, I'm seeing 5 things in the chat. Are there questions I should deal with?
No, I don't have anything in the chat after Pia's question. and subsequent thank you.
Okay. I've already addressed the implications of taking EBO TCP as a starting point. You don't simply want to take the early English books microfilm copy as your witness. They were chosen because they were convenient. It was convenient to go to the Huntington Library and the British Library and the Folger Library and microfilm a lot of stuff at once. That doesn't mean they were the best copies or the most logical copies. So do look at other copies and pick the right copy to be your witness. And that means you're going to need to spend some time looking for digital surrogates. In an ideal world, you would find the most complete copy with the most corrected sheets. So the fewest stop press. The most stop press corrections, the fewest errors that needed to be corrected via stop press corrections. In practice, that doesn't really work. When we're scanning the environment for a digital surrogate, we tend to look for ones that are already digitized, because then we don't have to pay for them to be digitized. We might have to pay to use them, but at least we don't have to pay for digitization. We tend to prefer things that are already licensed for educational use. The clearest full color scans. And if things are not digitized already, we're looking for books that are not bound so tightly that they cannot be digitized, and also not too expensive to scan. Finding copies is a little bit more difficult now because of the cybersecurity attack on the British Library. So the English short title catalog was an incredibly helpful resource. Worth noting, in case it ever comes back, that it wasn't always correct. So it relied on self-reporting by libraries, and libraries have staff who are, variously qualified to determine what book they actually have. We'll be circulating the slides later. So the Print Probability Project at Carnegie Mellon has whipped up a temporary interface for the ESCC. Go back to the Pollard and Redgrave short title catalog. These books generally don't move around, so whatever the STC says, copies are probably still there. Then you can check the online catalogs of the libraries to just double check that the copies are still there. Sometimes there's more than one copy. The Pollard and Redgrave short title catalog doesn't always capture that. New projects are coming on stream, which are designed to do the checking that the ESTC doesn't do. So the Shakespeare Census Project, the Marlowe Census Project, they are sending bibliographers out into the world who look at the books and make sure that they are what they say they are in the library catalog. And I'll give you links to those projects here and at the end of the slide as well. Couple of tips. Small libraries are often very generous and very kind. So interacting with the British Library, especially at this juncture in their history, can be a daunting and unfriendly experience. But small libraries are often excited to have their text used. In a couple of cases, people have gone off and digitized it immediately, and I've had scans back in an hour. They've been so thrilled that their copy of this thing was going to be used. If you find something on the Internet Archive, we can probably use it. So the Boston Public Library has already made all of their playbooks available for free on the Internet Archive. If you have a good camera and a stand, you can travel. You can make your own scans or surrogates or facsimiles. And then if they're reasonably good quality pictures, we can crop, clean up, skew, and split the images. I like to ask editors who are already in the vicinity of that library or archive to take pictures for other people. If you have a bit of money, you can hire a graduate student who's working near that library to take pictures for you. LEMDO already has quite a few digital surrogates, so we have all the assets from the ISE and the DRE. We have all 4 folios of Shakespeare's plays. We have all the quarto and octavos of Shakespeare's plays, sometimes more than one copy, including all of the British Library quartos, which are currently not available on the British Library site, and many other plays as well. Okay, I'm not going to spend really anytime at all on the transcription guidelines, because these are all going to be available online. But I just wanted to reassure you that there are guidelines for how to transcribe these texts. If you're checking a transcription or you're bringing an EBO TCP transcription into line with your chosen witness, then the transcription guidelines will be, what are you correcting towards? So, for example, you don't have to type out long S's. The regular short S will do, but you do want to preserve all the original spelling, without making any judgments about whether the spelling is authorial or scribal or compositorial. All of those transcription guidelines in the DRE editorial guidelines have been translated into encoding guidelines on the LEMDO documentation site. It is the longest chapter in our documentation. That's probably one of the most challenging things to do. So we have lots and lots of documentation for that. So just to recap, you've learned what a semi-diplomatic transcription is, why we prepare them and for whom, teachers, scholars, and ourselves. You've learned how the semi-diplomatic transcription fits into your edition. It is the first step. You've learned how to get started, which is an anthology-specific pathway. How to select your witness, which will be your base text and also represented in a facsimile also. And you've learned that DRE has principles for transcription and that LEMDO translates those into encoding guidelines. I should say that we are still in the process of translating those into encoding guidelines. So we have a little bit of work to do in the next few weeks to nail down some final things. When the slides go out, you'll have direct links to the guidelines and a list of all of our facsimiles. And the DRE editorial guidelines will probably be released in August, but if you want them right now, you can write to me or Navara or Mihaela and ask for the link. Here are a few external resources, all mentioned in the presentation. So now I am going to hand over to Laura.
Perfect. Thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my slides? Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes, and we can see your slides.
Okay, and are they not in presenter mode?
They are not in presenter mode.
Okay, thanks, Navara.
They look perfect.
Perfect. Okay. And thank you, Janelle. I have to say that these topics today dovetail very nicely. Today, I will be talking about encoding early modern English manuscript plays. And my name is Laura Estill. I'm a professor of English at St. Francis Xavier University and a Canada Research Chair in Digital Humanities. I'm the LEMDO manuscript consultant, and I am currently co-editing a manuscript of a play called Jocasta with Alex Lambourne, who is on the call with us today, for DRE and LEMDO. I live and work in Mi'kma'ki, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, and this territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which actually was not about surrendering land at all. In my part of the workshop today, we are going to be talking about the basics for editing a manuscript play for LEMDO, including how to organize your files, and then also thinking about transcription and encoding. And the transcription and encoding part is where I am going to dive in the most. So I'll have another little subheading for you there. So you've got a manuscript play. In our case, we have a manuscript play of Jocasta. It's in the British Library additional manuscript set. It was written by George Gascoigne and Frances Kinwell-Marsh with an epilogue by Christopher Yelverton. And the manuscript is dated to around 1568. And here you can see the first page of it. A lot of the things that Janelle talked about, including the importance of selecting a base text, not just a copy text, validate why you would choose thinking about a manuscript. In our case, for instance, the manuscript copy predates the earliest printed publications of the play, and the manuscript has never been used as a copy text before. Also, The kind of manuscript you have will impact how or why it might tell you about the text that you're editing. In our case, we have a presentation copy. So you can see from this image that it's a generally neat secretary hand. The speech prefixes are really clear. This copy was meant for a reader. This copy was meant to preserve and offer a record of the play, and was probably created not long after the play was originally performed at Gray's Inn at the Inns of Court. The other kinds of manuscripts that you might find for full text plays include playhouse documents, and those can be beautifully messy. And you might also have holograph or autograph copies. A holograph copy is a manuscript written entirely in the playwright's own handwriting, and an autograph is if they wrote their own name on it. When you're thinking about the kind of manuscript you have, which will be what drew you to it and will be what you write about in your introduction, and think about in the classroom, you will also want to think about how your manuscript relates to other early versions of the play. So in our case, we do have a full text printed versions of the play, the earliest one from 1573. And so when we do our collation, we use the manuscript as the base text, and then we turn to the early printed versions to look at where they've changed things. But you might not actually have a full text printed version of your play because, as we know, some manuscript plays exist only in manuscript, which might make your collation easier, but might make your transcription much more of a pain as you look to figure out if something is supposed to be, what words are which and letter shapes are which. So here, I just took a screenshot from my Oxygen to show you how the manuscript transcription that you do as your base text will be saved. So in your folder, which will be the short form of your play, in our case, it's JOC for Jocasta. Inside the main folder, you can see that we have two different XML files, and the one that's highlighted says EMD, which is Early Modern Drama, JOC, our short form, and then a short form for the archive that the manuscript is housed in. So we have a taxonomy list of archives. You can use that to indicate where your manuscript is. If on the off chance your archive has two complete manuscript plays, you would write here BL1 and then BL2. The file underneath that one that's labeled _M is it's the modern spelling version. And when you are creating your edition for semi-diplomatic transcriptions and for the modernized version, you're going to want to put all of your anchors, which are the things that you point to for the notes and the different materials that you can click on in the text when you see them displayed online. Those all go in the modernized version. And this actually is going to give you, putting them in the modernized version will make your life easier for manuscripts, and I'll tell you that in a bit. Okay, I am going to talk about transcribing and encoding for the bulk of my time today. And I'm going to walk you through some of the things that you might see most often in manuscripts. Of course, in a handwritten document, you have lots of abbreviations and expansions. Sometimes these include non-standard characters, and we'll talk about the challenges and joys of spelling and orthography. You will absolutely have additions and deletions in your manuscript. We'll talk a little bit about mise-en-page, which is captured only in the semi-diplomatic transcription and not in the modernized version. We'll talk about facsimiles, building on what Janelle said, and foliation, which is, of course, the manuscript-specific way we think about pagination, and what you do when you have missing information, and if you want to record anything about the handwriting in your manuscript. So if you're thinking about abbreviations, they're in the guidelines, and you'll want to, these go into the semi-diplomatic transcription. When you are modernizing your document, the abbreviations come out because you will modernize by putting in the complete modern word. Let me give you an example here from Jocasta. So here you can see a screenshot from the manuscript, and you see the word withdrew, which is written with a W, and then the TH in superscript, and then DREWE. The way you would transcribe that is that you would indicate that this is an abbreviation. The superscript TH tells us that that's part of the abbreviation. So you put the entire word in an abbreviation tag, ABBR, and you indicate that the TH are superscript with the HI element rendition equals and the attribute values. The attribute value will automatically populate for you as you put that in. And you can choose from a list in Oxygen, and you can say, I want this to be superscript. But that's not all you want to do. You also want to tell us what the expansion is. And so next to your abbreviation tag, ABBR tag, you put an expand tag, EXPAN, and you write the expansion of the word. And you nest both of those inside a choice tag. What is something to keep in mind is that you're actually modernizing the expansion of the early spelling. So you're not modernizing the spelling. So here our expansion is not the same as modernizing the word withdrew. We still have that terminal E on the end. It also means that sometimes a word looks right on the page, like I have, you know what? I have a slide here. You can see the full line says, no marvel, though the golden sun withdrew. Well, golden looks fine, except it has a macron on the end. So we know that we need to expand that and add an extra N on the end of that in the expansion, which is a funny way of thinking about it. Sometimes the expansions are counterintuitive. So this is what it looks like when you display your transcription on the site. We can see that we have the W, we can see that we have the TH superscript, and this will be both machine readable and also readable by people visiting the site. Another time that you will find yourself expanding, and this will also happen in printed texts, is when you have glyphs or special characters. So here you can see I've highlighted the word SUP with a big flourish at the bottom. That's called a cut P because the line comes back through the bottom of the P. NALL. Well, the cut P indicates that there's an expansion to happen here that's going to involve an R. So in this case, it's the word supernal. And you can see that we've encoded this by writing the abbreviation, tagging the cut P as a G. The G element in TEI means glyph. And we're going to expand the word to supernal, keeping the two L's at the end, even though that wouldn't be how we would spell it in a modernized way. I will note that some of the glyphs, when I use them in my Oxygen, it actually doesn't display this way. So here I took a screenshot so you could see that the cut P glyph here isn't looking correct in my Oxygen. But when I copied from the Oxygen into my PowerPoint slide, as I did, that's when I actually got, it did display properly. And so if you're getting the little box in Oxygen, don't fuss. I think it also depends on what your system is, because I can't remember, Alex, if you were getting those boxes as well, or if it was just my version of Oxygen / operating system. So
Yeah,
this is
no,
what you're getting them too? Okay, yeah. But I know that not everyone is. So this is what we see. We see the SU, the glyph is there with the cut P, NALL on the transcription on the website. And because we've got the expansion there, it's also searchable. In the guidelines, there's an entire section on encoding glyphs and ligatures. The ligatures are the two letters Janelle mentioned, for instance, OE in a single piece of type. Of course, we still see some ligatures in handwriting, and they're like those digraphs, and there's an entire section for you to look at. But one thing to keep in mind is, do you need to encode every single glyph or digraph or ligature? And the first thing you're going to want to do is talk with your anthology lead, because there will be anthology specific guidelines for that. And the other thing you'll want to do is explain any choices in your textual introduction. And you can also explain them in your TEI header. Well, we're speaking of spelling. I want to bring us back to the way we have our modern spelling XML file and our semi-diplomatic transcription XML file. Your notes are going to be in the modern transcription, which means that some words that you could want to put a note on will actually, you won't need a note as soon as you modernize them. So here is the word harborough in our manuscript, which I thought, well, what's a harborough? We'll need to put a note on that. Turns out that the OED tells us that it is a variant of the word harbor. It is not a special variant. The head word is always harbor when you click through. So we will modernize that as the word harbor, at which point we don't need a note in the modern spelling. And folks looking at the semi-diplomatic transcription will be able to see in the modern spelling what this word means. As in your manuscript, there will invariably be deletions. So here's a really straightforward way of showing what your deletions might look like. We see a line from the manuscript that says who being, and then struck through, not able in his time. The XML encodes the part that has the strike through as not able in the del tag, which means deletion, and indicates that it should be a strike through. And when you commit your file with del rendition rnd : strike through, it will display just like this, and they will be able to see the strike through in the online version. You will also likely have additions, those little words that people forgot and sneak in. Here I'm using an example from the Douai manuscript for Macbeth. You can see that they have an addition of the word do written above the line, and they also have a caret in there, and you can see what it looks like on the website. You'll want to encode additions with the ADD. So that means add. And we're going to use place, which is the attribute that tells you where something is on the page, place above. So here, the manuscript compiler forgot the R in trickling tears and wrote tickling tears. This is an actual example from our manuscript. And realized they had to add it back in because Jocasta is a super serious tragedy. This attribute, the place attribute, appears in the semi-diplomatic transcription and not in the modernized version, because in the modernized version, we will simply write the word trickling. And the place attribute, there's a whole taxonomy that tells you what you can have there, and it will also automatically populate an oxygen as you type. And so it will say, oh, do you want this to be in the left-hand margin? Do you want it to be below the line and above the line? The thing to remember about semi-diplomatic transcriptions is the word semi, or prefix semi. We are not capturing everything. So usually, and this will probably be across editions, you're going to avoid capturing flourishes, line fillers, fancy letters with extra curly cues. But we will be encoding things like accents and diacritical markers, strike throughs, superscript, and subscript. So Janelle gestured to that at the end of her presentation. Part of the reason we are not going to encode everything is that ideally in your edition, you will have a facsimile. And the facsimile will be added to each page break of your semi-diplomatic transcription. And what this means is that I find that incredibly relieving to know that I am not trying to create a diplomatic transcription that follows everything exactly on the page, where I realize that someone can go and look at the facsimile themselves. So this is how you encode that facsimile. In the semi-diplomatic transcription, one of the key ways that your information will be organized is by page, as Janelle pointed to using the print signature example. And the element we use there is PB, and the attribute for facsimiles is at FACS. And I'm going to take it back and I'm going to go through the page break element a little more clearly, but I wanted to highlight this to you to help you feel more confident about ignoring, for instance, whether or not you wanted to capture every version of the Greek E versus the secretary E in your handwriting. So on the page break element, which is PB, which stands for page break, it's an empty element. So what you can see here is that it closes itself. So you're not opening a page and then closing a page at the end. You're putting in these milestone elements to say, this is where the page starts. And that helps to avoid overlap in the TEI, for instance, when speeches go beyond different pages. It also means that you can put PB anywhere. So it closes itself. There's not an end tag on it. And you're going to include an N attribute. And the reason for manuscripts we include N attributes by hand is because the manuscript convention is that books are not paginated 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a way that a computer could automatically count. They're paginated folio 1 recto, folio 1 verso, as we know. And so you can just write F dot and then what the page number you're on. This also helps if you have manuscripts with inserted pages and you get into 3A recto, for instance. So we've talked a little bit about how to encode the things that you see on the page, but I also want to mention how to encode things that you don't see on the page. So here's an image. I took an image from the early printed text in 100 Sundry Flowers at the bottom, and I took an image from our manuscript at the top, and we can see that there is a missing speech prefix here, which is the speech prefix for Oedipus. Alex wrote about this in his undergraduate thesis. You need that speech prefix to make sense. It does not make sense for Antigone to ask about supporting her father and then talk about herself enduring. So even in your semi-diplomatic transcription, you might want to include this information. There's an element for that. What you'll want to do is use the supplied element. This will provide material that's missing in the manuscript. If, like this example, it appears in an early print source, you will include the source of the information in your collation. If you have a manuscript without a print source that you are collating with, you can still use the supplied element if it makes sense that there's a missing speech prefix, for instance, that you want to include. Your anthology guidelines will let you know what kinds of things are appropriate to supply, and some things include entrances and exits for stage directions, etc. When you use the supplied element, and here's our example here, you can see that we have supplied the speaker name, and we've used OEDI because that is the speech prefix that's used on the rest of the page here. There, in the TEI at the top, there are no square brackets around OEDI. That is because LEMDO automatically puts in the square brackets for you, as you can see here. And it also puts it into italics for you to indicate that these materials are not in your source text. Of course, you might not be the only person who's noticed something missing in your text. There might be a later reader, perhaps, that has gone through and added a missing word, or we have an example in our manuscript with a missing speech prefix that's added in a different hand later on. So what you might want to do is indicate changes in handwriting in the manuscript. If you have a Playhouse document, there will very likely be more than one hand writing revisions in things. And in the TEI, you can indicate the different hands that are used. So there are two places that you do that. The first is in the hand description, which is nested very specifically in your header. I've put it here so you can see where it goes, but you'll be able to find that information in the guidelines as well. And that's where you declare hand 1 is a uniformly neat secretary used for the most of the manuscript, for instance, and hand 2 is a messy italic, for instance. And then what you can do is you can call to the different hands that are used in your manuscript in the body of your transcription as well. So in the Douai manuscript, Julius Caesar, they have the hand Douai hand 2 that has added in an aside with a little square bracket in the right-hand margin that you can see at in this encoding. Okay. Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up. Today we covered the basics for editing a manuscript play for LEMDO, including thinking about your files, although what we focused on primarily is transcription and encoding. If we want later on, I could talk more about the TEI header for manuscripts, and I encourage you to, you can look at the Jocasta files that Alex and I are working on, with the very large caveat that these are incredibly work in progress files. So we're still making mistakes and learning as well. In order to think about editing manuscripts for LEMDO, what we saw in these slides are, we looked at the manuscript facsimile, we looked at the encoding, and we looked at the current ways these are displayed on the dev site, which could change. Our main takeaways is that it's a semi-diplomatic transcription. So as Sarah Neville pointed out during one of the previous seminars, we are not trying to capture everything. As we heard from Janelle earlier today, you'll need to make editorial choices, and you'll be working in tandem with your anthology lead to make those choices at an anthology level as well. To find more information, we are working on encoding the manuscript guidelines, and if you have questions today, the kinds of questions that you have will actually help us shape those guidelines and make sure that they're clear. The beautiful and glorious thing about manuscripts is that they are each so different and will always give us new edge cases to consider in our encodings. So please feel free to reach out to me and the LEMDO team. And I wanted to say thank you to Shirk for funding this, Navara for designing the slides, Martin and the HCMC team, as well as Alex for co-editing, Janelle, Brett, and Navara, who have been patiently answering my questions, and Lean Cotignyes and the Douai Project for providing their XML and additions on LEMDO. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So we'll open up the floor for questions. May I jump in to add one note to clarify something Laura said? That example you gave of Harborough, I would be collating that as well so that users of the modern text can see what the manuscript actually said.
Yeah.
It's always a judgment call, but that seems to be a step beyond a simple spelling variation that you've standardized.
Would the supplied devices and such also be collated? Do you mean like the visual printers ornaments, Christine? Like the printers devices?
Yeah, or just anything that like any of those things, would they be noted in the collation? I wonder whether anything supplied or added or noted in the semi-diplomatic is also added to the collation.
We don't supply very much in the semi-diplomatic transcriptions. You know, you might supply something that's not visible in your witness. Like what if the best witness you have has a tiny little bit of text torn away, but there's another witness at another library that you are not taking as your base text that supplies the information that you need. You know, as a courtesy to the reader who's going to want to search as full a text as possible, you could supply the information from a different witness. So I think what Laura did in the case of the missing speech prefix is good. She's supplying that information from a very closely related contemporary text. But what Laura wouldn't do is supply information because Laura knows that Oedipus has to be speaking at this point, not Antigone. So you don't put in much, you don't apply much editorial intervention into the semi-diplomatic text, or at least not as much as you would in the modern text.
And in the modern text, you would for sure supply the missing speech prefix. Navarra has just put in a link to the guidelines on supplied.
Got it. I think I'm thinking more of the modernized. Thank you.
Leah.
Hi, so I'm doing more of like a modern anthology where we're taking articles written by students. And about the supplied tag, if I have an author that's taken a quote and they've just used square brackets just to make that quote flow better in their general sentence, would that also be a situation for a supplied tag?
You can put square brackets in material that's wrapped with a quote element, because we recognize that people do use square brackets in their writing, and we have to be able to transcribe them accurately when we're quoting.
Right, but I think Leah's question is if you're the one introducing the square brackets to change the quote.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, if you introduce a change, then yes, you wrap it in the supplied element, and then we will wrap it in square brackets. Okay, if you want to shorten a quotation, there's also a gap element. Gap reason equals sampling, and it's a self-closing element.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Is the gap currently set to display with an ellipsis, just out of curiosity?
Yes, it puts an ellipsis and square brackets into the quotation.
And I will note that in manuscript encoding, you use the gap for places that you can't read. So for instance, if there's a hole in your manuscript, or perhaps an ink blot that you just can't possibly see the words underneath, or some early writers were really diligent in the way they crossed things out. So then you can use gap, and there you can say reason equals illegible or whole when you're encoding a gap in an early manuscript.
We have a whole taxonomy of allowed values for the reason attribute on the gap element. And if the reason that you need isn't part of our taxonomy, you know, maybe cat paw, we could add it if necessary.
I found LEMDO's taxonomies to be incredibly useful, because you can go and see what's there, and then also say, oh, could we possibly think about including something else as well, like Janelle just mentioned. But I think it helps me think about the data modeling that is editing.
Thank you, Laura. I think we've had the benefit of having remediated about 150 semi-diplomatic transcriptions now, and of working with the Douay manuscript folks. It's forced us to think about all the contingencies that have arisen in those 150 plus texts so far. we're at 9 o'clock. So let's call it for today. Thank you very much for coming out. We'll get this transcribed and posted to YouTube in a few weeks. Thank you very much, Laura, for being here today and presenting on manuscripts.
Oh, thank you. It's a lot of fun.